Something strange happens when a stone tool is treated not as a tool, but as a border marker. A flake of flint, struck from a core in a particular way, suddenly becomes more than an artifact. It becomes a passport stamp, a troop movement, a claim over territory, a line drawn across deserts and valleys. That is why the quarrel over Nubian Levallois technology is not a small technical disagreement about angles, scars, platforms, or old cave collections. It is one of the quiet battlefields inside paleoanthropology, because hidden inside this quarrel is a much larger question. Where was the true boundary between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens during the deep late Pleistocene? Was the boundary in the northern Levant, near the mountains, caves and corridors of Western Asia, where classic Neanderthal territories pressed against expanding Homo sapiens populations? Or was the boundary dragged far south into Arabia, Egypt and the Nile corridor, turning the very route out of Africa into contested ground? This is the explosive implication of the Shukba cave dispute. At first glance, Shukba is just a cave, first excavated in the early 20th century by Dorothy Garrod, a site with animal bones, stone tools, hearths, breccia, and a single unusual tooth. But that tooth changed the stakes. It belonged to a young Neanderthal child, roughly 9 years old, and its location made it important because Shukba sits farther south than the classic Neanderthal heartland of Europe and the northern Levant. When researchers revisited the tooth and the stone tools, one side argued that the archaeological collection included Nubian Levallois technology, a method long treated by many researchers as connected to Homo sapiens dispersals through northeast Africa and Arabia. If Neanderthals at Shukba were truly using Nubian Levallois, then one of the supposed technological fingerprints of Homo sapiens had crossed over. The tool no longer pointed cleanly to one population. The border blurred, but the opposing side answered with force. They argued that Shukba Layer D could not be treated as one clean, sealed moment in time. It was a thick, brecciated deposit, ranging from roughly 20 centimetres to 2.5 metres, with signs that material had been disturbed, mixed and redeposited, in a cave that matters enormously. A deposit like that is not a frozen snapshot. It is a palimpsest, a compressed archive of different visits, different occupations, different toolmaking episodes, and possibly different populations. If artifacts from different phases were excavated together under one early 20th century label, then the association between a Neanderthal tooth and a particular tool type becomes unstable. The tooth is real. The tools are real. The question is whether they truly belong together. This is where the scientific argument becomes a proxy war. One interpretation says the Shukba Neanderthal child and the Nubian-looking tools belong to the same technological world. That interpretation breaks the old habit of treating Nubian Levallois as a secure marker of Homo sapiens. The other interpretation says the supposed Nubian pieces are not proven Nubian under strict criteria, and even if some pieces resemble Nubian cores or points, the cave deposit is too mixed to tie them directly to the tooth. The disagreement is technical, but the consequence is geographic. If Nubian Levallois is not exclusively tied to Homo sapiens, then the tool loses power as a migration signal. If the tool keeps its association with Homo sapiens, then it helps trace a chain from northeast Africa through Arabia and into the southern Levant, placing Homo sapiens across the corridors that out of Africa models often need as exit routes. The real fight, then, is over the map. In the standard migration narrative, Homo sapiens emerges in Africa, then at some stage expands outward through northeast Africa, the Sinai, Arabia or the Levant. But the Middle Paleolithic map is not empty. It is already crowded with older populations, shifting climates, changing lakes, deserts that open and shut, and stone technologies that refuse to behave like ethnic badges. If Nubian Levallois in Arabia and the Nile corridor is treated as Homo sapiens technology, then those landscapes become corridors used by Homo sapiens, not barriers blocking them. But if Nubian Levallois could be made by Neanderthals, then the corridors become contested territory. Suddenly the Nile, Nubia, the southern Levant and Arabia are not just paths out of Africa. They become possible zones of contact, competition, imitation, convergence or replacement. That is why the Shukba claim matters far beyond one cave. The Max Planck study framed the finding as evidence that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens used identical Nubian technology. That sentence alone is enough to shake an entire interpretive system, because identical technology means archaeology cannot safely assign population identity by tool form alone. If a Neanderthal child was associated with tools once claimed as unique to Homo sapiens, then the old equation collapses. Nubian Levallois equals modern human movement. The tool still matters, but it stops functioning like a species label made of stone. The response paper attacked that conclusion at its foundation. It argued that layer D was not a single clean assemblage, that the tooth was not securely tied to the alleged Nubian artifacts, that the artifacts were not demonstrated to meet strict Nubian criteria, and that the comparison sample was biased. This is a direct strike at every link in the chain. A Neanderthal tooth alone proves Neanderthals reached Shukba. Stone tools alone prove people occupied the cave. But to prove Neanderthals made Nubian Levallois, one has to prove that the tooth and those tools belong to the same archaeological event, and that the tools truly qualify as Nubian rather than ordinary Levallois cores with similar shaping. That is a much harder claim. The dispute over definition is especially important. Nubian Levallois is not just any pointed flake. It is a particular reduction strategy involving a prepared core, a steep distal guiding ridge, controlled removals, and a core geometry designed to shape elongated pointed flakes. The critics emphasize that Levallois cores with distal and lateral preparation are not automatically Nubian. Bidirectional and centripetal Levallois methods can create pieces that resemble Nubian forms, especially after heavy reduction. That distinction is the heart of the matter. A tired core, worked down until its geometry looks triangular and its distal ridge appears steep, can imitate the outline of a Nubian core without being produced by the Nubian method. In archaeology, resemblance is not enough. Method matters. This is why the Rockefeller Museum material became so damaging to the Shukba claim. The critics examined a portion of the Shukba Layer D collection that included lower Paleolithic elements, upper Paleolithic elements, and even a polished axe from a much later period. In the same labelled layer, there were hand axe-like artifacts, a Cholo-Yabrudian material, Aurignacian-looking material, an Elwad point, and later polished stone. That is not the profile of a clean single occupation. It is the profile of a collection shaped by old excavation methods, cave disturbance, selective saving, and long-term mixing. Once that is accepted, the confidence drops sharply. A Neanderthal tooth found at the base of a hard breccia cannot automatically be paired with every artifact placed under the same broad layer label. And yet the more provocative interpretation refuses to vanish, because the broader region keeps pulling the argument back into deep territory. The Levant was not a simple border between two worlds. It was a long, inhabited contact zone. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals both occupied this wider landscape at different times. Caves in the region preserve evidence of shifting populations, overlapping technologies, and ambiguous cultural boundaries. In that setting, the idea that Neanderthals learned, copied, converged upon, or independently developed a Nubian-like strategy is not impossible in cultural terms. Neanderthals were skilled stoneworkers with complex technological traditions. They were not primitive imitators standing outside intelligence. If the geometry worked, they could create it. The question is not whether Neanderthals were capable. The question is whether Shukba proves it. That distinction is the line between a bold inference and a demonstrated association. The Shukba tooth proves a Neanderthal presence in the southern Levant. The cave tools prove complex Levallois reduction in the same broad collection. But the critics insist that the phrase direct association is doing too much work. In Paleolithic archaeology, direct association is a demanding standard. It asks whether the fossil and artifact were sealed together in the same precise layer under conditions that prevent mixing. Shukba, excavated in 1928, does not give that level of control. Dorothy Garrod was brilliant, but the methods of that time lacked the microstratigraphic precision expected now. Thick deposits were grouped broadly. Cave sediments were described in large units. Items were kept, moved, curated, and later re-examined after decades in collections. That history places a shadow over every strong claim. Still, the psychological reason this dispute matters is clear. Out of Africa, narratives need geography. They need routes, pauses, bottlenecks, corridors, barriers, and encounters. If Homo sapiens remained inside Africa for a long time, before expanding widely, one explanation is climate. Deserts blocked movement. Sea levels changed. Ecological windows opened and shut. But another explanation, less often stated plainly, is occupation by other humans. If Neanderthals or Neanderthal-connected populations occupied the southern Levant, Arabia, or even parts of northeast Africa at times, then Homo sapiens were not simply waiting for a green corridor. They were facing human competitors. In that frame, the delay is not only ecological, it is strategic. This is the front hidden inside the tool argument. If Nubian Levallois in northeast Africa and Arabia belongs mainly to Homo sapiens, then the technological trail places Homo sapiens across the Nile corridor, the Nubian desert margins, Arabia, and the southern Levant. The contact zone with Neanderthals sits farther north, around the northern Levant, Anatolia, the Zagros region, and the wider western Asian belt. But if Nubian Levallois can belong to Neanderthals, the contact zone moves south. The line of confrontation shifts into the very landscapes often used to explain Homo sapiens' dispersal. That turns the exit route into a battlefield of interpretation. The stakes become even higher because Nubian Levallois has been used as a marker of dispersal across desert landscapes where fossils are rare. Stone tools often survive where bones do not. In Arabia, the Negev, Egypt, Sudan, and parts of northeast Africa, researchers have treated Nubian technology as evidence of population movement, interaction, or shared technological tradition. In the absence of skulls, teeth, or genetic material, the tool becomes the human signature. But Shukba challenges that logic. If the same method is made by Neanderthals, then every map built from Nubian tools has to be redrawn with caution. If the Shukba critics are right, then the challenge fails, and Nubian Levallois keeps its force as a Homo sapiens-linked signal across the southern corridor. This is not only a dispute over Neanderthals, it is also a dispute over Homo sapiens identity. Archaeologists have long struggled with the temptation to assign stone tools to biological groups. Mousterian equals Neanderthal. Upper Paleolithic equals modern human. Nubian Levallois equals Homo sapiens. These equations are convenient, but the past keeps breaking them. Neanderthals made sophisticated tools. Homo sapiens sometimes made Middle Paleolithic tools that look conservative. Different populations use similar methods because they face similar stone, similar tasks, and similar constraints. Technology can spread across groups. Technology can also converge independently. A stone core does not carry a genome. The Shukba argument exposes this weakness brutally. On one side, researchers see a Neanderthal tooth, a Nubian-like technology, and say the old marker cannot be exclusive. On the other side, researchers answer that this is exactly how overinterpretation starts, with an insecure cave layer, a mixed assemblage, and a visual resemblance inflated into a population claim. Both sides understand the danger. If one tool type is allowed to override stratigraphic caution, archaeology becomes storytelling with artifacts. But if every technological association is treated as too uncertain, then the map of human dispersal loses one of its strongest lines of evidence. The critics made another crucial point. The Shukba assemblage appears dominated by centripetal Levallois methods. In their analysis, most identifiable Levallois cores and flakes showed centripetal patterns, while bidirectional and convergent methods were less common. That matters because centripetal Levallois is widespread in the Levantine Middle Paleolithic and does not require a Nubian attribution. The critics argued that the supposed Nubian pieces fit more parsimoniously into a continuum of Levallois variation, rather than a deliberate Nubian reduction system. In plain terms, the Shukba tools do not need to be Nubian to make sense. They already fit within the wider Levantine Middle Paleolithic toolkit. That word, parsimonious, is cold but powerful. It means the simplest explanation that accounts for the evidence. The critics are not saying Neanderthals lacked the ability to make Nubian Levallois. They are saying Shukba does not prove they did. The deposit is mixed. The tooth sits in an insecure position. The cores are insufficiently documented under strict Nubian criteria. The end products are difficult to distinguish from other Levallois points without refits. The comparative sample is limited. Each weakness alone creates doubt. Together, they turn a headline claim into a contested interpretation. Yet there is a reason the headline captured attention. It offered a dramatic reversal. For years, Nubian Levallois helped support images of Homo sapiens moving through Africa and Arabia with a recognizable technological package. Then Shukba seemed to place that package in Neanderthal hands. It was the kind of finding that punctures a simple map. It says that the southern Levant was not a clean staging ground, not a neat gate, not a corridor labelled with one species name. It was a region where identities overlapped, where tools crossed boundaries, and where a child's tooth in a cave could force researchers to reconsider the meaning of an entire technological tradition. The deeper irony is that both sides are fighting against simplistic thinking, but from opposite directions. The Shukba team challenges the simplicity of linking Nubian Levallois only to Homo sapiens. The critics challenge the simplicity of linking a Neanderthal tooth to a mixed tool collection. One side says the biological label attached to the tool is too narrow. The other says the archaeological association is too weak. Both arguments attack certainty. Both reveal how fragile the connection between stone and species can be. For the out-of-Africa debate, this becomes especially sensitive because geography and timing do not sit quietly in the background. If Homo sapiens were already moving through northeast Africa, Arabia and the southern Levant using Nubian Levallois, then the delay in wider expansion cannot be explained by a simple southern wall of Neanderthals occupying those same corridors. The front stays north. Homo sapiens were not trapped inside Africa by Neanderthal control of Nubia or Arabia. They were already across the threshold, probing, settling, retreating, expanding and interacting across a broad, contextual area. But if Neanderthals reached far enough south and used the same technology, then the entire threshold becomes more contested. The exit route is no longer just a route. It becomes a human frontier. That frontier does not need to mean organized war in the modern sense. The Paleolithic war was likely quieter and more brutal in its own way. Competition over springs, hunting grounds, caves, raw material sources, seasonal corridors, and mating networks. A valley used by one group in a wet phase could become a choke point in a dry phase. A cave overlooking a route could change hands over centuries. A river corridor could connect populations during humid intervals and strand them during arid collapse. The war inside paleoanthropology mirrors the possible struggle on the ground. Who occupied the passageways, who controlled the corridors, and whose tools mark the movement. This is why Shukba sits at the center of something larger than itself. The cave is not just a cave, it is a symbolic checkpoint between Africa and Eurasia. A Neanderthal child there means Neanderthals pressed farther south than many classic maps emphasize. Nubian-like tools there mean either the technology crossed population boundaries or the collection has been overread. Both conclusions carry weight. If the tools crossed boundaries, then cultural transfer or convergence undermines clean migration markers. If the collection has been overread, then the case becomes a warning against forcing old excavation material into modern population arguments. The debate also reveals an institutional habit inside human origins research. When a tool supports a favored migration model, it is often treated as a signal. When it complicates that model, its ambiguity becomes more visible. That does not mean bad faith, it means the evidence is filtered through large narratives. Researchers are human, they argue from frameworks. A Nubian core in Arabia looks like a Homo sapiens dispersal clue if the framework expects Homo sapiens movement through Arabia. A Nubian core near a Neanderthal tooth looks like a Neanderthal challenge if the framework expects technological sharing or overlap. The artifact itself stays silent. The framework speaks around it. And the artifact is complicated. Nubian Levallois is not a simple shape, but a sequence of decisions. The napper prepared a core so that a central ridge could guide the main removal. The platform, ridge angle, lateral shaping and distal preparation all mattered. This is not casual flaking. It reflects planning, anticipation and skill. That is why it has been treated as meaningful across landscapes. But technological meaning does not equal biological ownership. A method can spread, a method can be reinvented, a method can appear similar when raw material, reduction intensity, and desired end product push different groups toward comparable solutions. The Shukba critics leaned heavily on this point when they argued that basic measurements alone cannot settle the issue. Length, width, thickness and ratios are useful, but they do not fully reveal reduction strategy. A core's history is written in scar direction, ridge creation, platform preparation and sequence. Without refits, without detailed technological description, without secure context, labels become fragile. A pointed flake is not automatically Nubian. A triangular core is not automatically Nubian. A steep ridge is not enough by itself. The method must be demonstrated. This is where the fight becomes almost philosophical. Paleoanthropology wants population history from broken stone, but broken stone resists. Genetics gives ancestry, but fossils with genetic material are rare in these regions and periods. Fossils give anatomy, but fossils are rare and often isolated. Archaeology gives abundance, but tools cross boundaries. Every category of evidence solves one problem and creates another. Shukba is powerful precisely because it contains all three tensions: a fossil, tools, and a contested context. It promises a direct connection, then withholds certainty. What survives from this dispute is not a simple victory for either side. The strongest conclusion is that Shukba proves the danger of using Nubian Levallois as an automatic population label, while also proving the danger of using Shukba as a decisive Neanderthal case. The cave widens the debate, but does not end it. It forces researchers to ask harder questions about old collections, strict definitions, and the geographic meaning of technology. It also forces the out of Africa narrative to confront a sharper problem. The routes out of Africa were not empty lanes through nature. They were inhabited landscapes with other humans nearby, and the archaeological signals across those landscapes are not obedient. The unanswered question is where the real boundary was. If the southern corridors were Homo sapiens dominated, then Nubian Levallois belongs to a broad modern human emergence zone stretching across northeast Africa, Arabia, and the southern Levant. If Neanderthals also entered that technological world, then the boundary dissolved into contact, overlap, and shared methods. If Shukba is simply a mixed cave deposit with an insecure association, then the controversy itself still teaches the same lesson. The border between populations cannot be drawn with one tool type. In the end, the war over the Levant is not just about who made a core, it is about who gets to place the line on the map. Move the line south, and Homo sapiens face a wall of Neanderthals across the very corridors they supposedly needed to leave Africa. Move the line north, and Homo sapiens already occupy the Nile, Arabia, and the southern Levant, pushing the true zone of confrontation toward the northern Levant, the Zagros, and the mountain gates of Eurasia. The same stone tool becomes two different histories depending on where that line is drawn. And somewhere beneath the arguments, beneath the old cave labels and the museum trays, beneath the tooth of a child and the scars on a flint core, the real story waits. Not a clean march out of Africa, not a simple replacement, but a shifting frontier where ancient humans met each other long before the maps became doctrine. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, like, comment and share our video if you found this information compelling.